Ah, the creatures of the night. What sweet music they make. Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a collection of hundreds of monster ecology and strategy videos on my channel. Check them out. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing as I upload at least twice a week. Well, my friends, after some dedicated and heroic near constant requests over the course of a few years, it's time to have a little chat about Ravenloft. This might be somewhat refreshing for those who, like me, know very little about the place, because in making this video I am taking the opportunity to learn about it along with you. I can say that I'm not unfamiliar with the style of game that Ravenloft encapsulates, because I have played more than a few games of Call of Cthulhu, and there are many similarities in the way Ravenloft feels. This is a game about horror, not so much about heroes, more like who can survive the longest, and the outcome for the player characters is most likely to be very grim indeed. Ravenloft is a fun-filled fairground where all the rides end gruesomely. This style of game used to be very hard to explain to people who had never played a role-playing game, but with video games, now including horror as a genre, and players of those games aware that getting killed can be very amusing, if even just for the jump scare, there is some common ground that video game and tabletop gamers share. Sit down with any bunch of experienced role players and get them talking about character deaths, and they come alive with stories of heroic, pathetic, unfair, well-deserved, hilarious and satisfying character and non-character deaths. Certainly, I've got a load of memories, mostly great, some quite lame and annoying, such as a ninja character who was stabbed in the heart and killed by a shopkeeper. No dice rolls, just because he asked if the man had any ninja weapons. A bit of an overreaction, and I never did play a ninja character again. It would be remiss of me not to warn people who have come into the hobby as fans of broadcast games like Twitch and YouTube that tabletop games don't face the problem of having an audience of fans who throw hissy fits when a character they like is killed. Tabletop players have every right to voice their concerns about this new breed of players who treat character death like some sort of psychological trauma or failure of the game. It's not gatekeeping, it's just signalling their gaming preferences. Perfectly reasonable. Everyone should be aware of what sort of games they want to run and participate in. Mainly this is only an issue in games where you don't know the people who you'll be gaming with beforehand. In games with your friends, everyone is usually on the same page and all the social politics just get hiffed directly out the nearest window. What happens around the table, in your home, with your friends is entirely your own business. I would even go so far as to speculate that all of the problematic players and game masters you read about at great length and frequency on Facebook groups, tweets and comment threads is just a small fraction of the total gaming population. As I often say, when the friendship is good, the rules really don't matter, and most game table problems have little to do with rules and much more to do with personalities. Don't blame the rulebook if you're acting like a dick, and don't expect a role-playing game to save a broken friendship. Ravenloft is a horror fantasy. It is, in a nutshell, a unique setting based on a pocket dimension created by super mysterious powers of darkness, who draw in and trap beings of great power and will, along with others who fall into this cosmic trap like moths into a nest of spiders. The moths may flutter and fight and make quite a show of it, but there is very slim chance that they're ever going to break free, and a good chance they're just going to fly out of that web and get snared by another anyway. It may not sound like much fun to play the role of the moth, but actually it really is. I guess we all deep down want to be the underdog, to get a few good kicks and screams in when the spider shows up. Ravenloft is also a lot more complex than the 5th edition adventure book of Strahd may lead you to believe. In fact, for this video, I'm just going to talk about one book from the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, The Domains of Dread, because they explain what the domains are, how they work, and what is found inside them, as well as the origins and history of them. There's a whole load of information. I'm just going to briefly cover what Ravenloft is in this video. I'm now going to quote directly from the book with my own interjections and thoughts, as it is a very well written and quite clear, but towards the end of this I'm going to start paraphrasing and swapping things around, so if you're following along in the book it's going to get a bit weird. The true history of Ravenloft begins in a distant world whose name is unspoken, even by the bravest of men. Some say that its origins have been forgotten by all but one. That may be true. The shadowy world had kingdoms not unlike those found on Earth, Faerun, Kryn, or any of the other spheres that circle the fiery burning stars of the prime material plane. Our journey into the past begins at the heart of one such place. It was called Barovia, and it was the quarry in which the keystone of Ravenloft was cut. Before we begin our voyage, we must establish a certain criteria by which it can be measured. After all, a journey is not judged by its beginning or its end, but by its middle. So for this book, and when running games where such things matter, the setting uses the Barovian calendar. To give some comparison, the current year in the Forgotten Realms setting and the Dale Reckoning is 1492 DR, and in Ravenloft, this would be 876 BC, or Barovian calendar, based on the foundation of the Barovian nation, which got drawn into the Mists and became the founding domain. Okay, let's return to the book. Few, if any, records detail the events surrounding the life of the warrior prince Strahd von Zarovich. It is known, as he freely admits it, that he and his family had been driven out of their ancestral home by an enemy he calls the Turgs. Exactly who these people were or what their motivations might have been, we have no way of knowing. It's enough to say that they are painted as ransacking barbarians by Strahd, and there seems to be no reason to discount his assertions. After decades of warfare, vicious, hard warfare, Strahd and his legions drove the Turgs back through the mountain passes from which they had come. At long last, the enemy was defeated and the ancestral lands of the von Zarovich family reclaimed. Entering the Valley of Barovia at the head of a weary and battered army, the great prince claimed the right to rule over all the lands that had been reclaimed from the Turgs. Some scholars point to this as being nothing more than trading one tyrant for another. Others, however, see Strahd as a liberating hero who claimed no more than was his just reward for years of effort. As his subjects repaired Castle Ravenloft, their ancestral home, Strahd sent word to the scattered survivors of his clan. He called for them to join him and to establish a lineage that will rule over Barovia for centuries to come. By his order, a coronet of the purest silver was created to mark the occasion and became the symbol of power in that green land. Little did Strahd realize that 3/4 of a millennium later he would still wear that tarnished crown. For his outward enthusiasm and vitality, the Lord of Barovia was but a shell of the band he had once been. Years of campaigning had left him mentally, emotionally, and physically drained, brutalized. While his health was sound enough, his spirit had passed into a grey, wasting period that could only end in a lingering demise of the soul and then the flesh. Strahd had accepted his fate. With the Turg defeated and the ancestral lands reclaimed, his task was done. Death would come for the aging warrior. He neither feared it nor sought to escape its embrace. With the coming of his brother Sergei, however, Strahd's life suddenly changed. Sergei was nearly 2 decades younger than Strahd and among the most handsome men in Barovia. In many ways, he reminded the warrior prince of himself in the years before he'd taken up the sword and shield. He had but to look upon Sergei to see all the vibrance of the life he himself had given up. Strahd, of course, despised him for this. In coming to the valley, Sergei met a young woman named Tatiana, who was every bit as beautiful and vital as Sergei, so it came as no surprise to anyone when they announced their plans to marry. Strahd, however, took this news as a defeat greater than any he had ever experienced in war. The Lord of Barovia was deeply and passionately in love with this simple village girl. He saw her as a chance to recapture all the things that he had thought lost to him. Surely, she was betrothed to the wrong man. She was his key to restoration of his spirit. The tragic events that followed is the story of the creation of the vampire Strahd, in a pact with death itself, sealed in the blood of his own brother's murder, and soon after, the suicide of Tatiana, who flung herself from the walls of Castle Ravenloft into the mists below, mists which then rose up and swallowed the whole realm. The tragic events, according to the Barovian calendar, this was in 351 BC, when the mists ascended to claim Strahd, Castle Ravenloft, and the entire land of Barovia. No one knows how it is that the demiplane was formed, although many theories have been put forward. Perhaps we would be best advised not to dwell too long on this mystery. So Strahd became a vampire, and the mists of the dark powers, perhaps the same powers he created this evil pact with, swallowed up his entire kingdom forever. Their motivations and nature are left deliberately vague, so I will not speculate on them. The dark powers are just that, dark, mysterious powers. The first 100 years of Ravenloft's existence are dated by most scholars from the year 350, although the actual formation of the demiplane of Dread didn't occur until 351 BC. This is both a matter of convenience and recognition of the fact that the events which drew the mists of Barovia predated the actual formation of the land. The first century, as it is often called, was a time of microcosm. The only domain held by the mist was that of Barovia, and the only lord was Strahd von Zarovich. This period is detailed in the novel I, Strahd. No evidence exists of a true Vistani presence in Barovia at this time, although there were gypsies certainly present and apparent. These, I guess, were the natives of Barovia. The next period, from 450 to 549 BC, is marked by the arrival of a new race of people, the mysterious Vistani. Their leader, Madame Eva, was quick to see the power of the vampire Strahd and forged an uneasy alliance with him. Exactly where these people come from is unknown, another mystery, but they certainly had powers even then, and no other creatures in Ravenloft could fathom what these powers were or where they came from. In addition to the Vistani, other notable creatures came into Ravenloft during this time. Most important among them are Jandar Sunstar and the Lich Azalin. It is during this time that Strahd faced his first great challenge in Ravenloft, a group of adventurers who found their way into the mists and from some distant land, entered Castle Ravenloft and sought the destruction of the vampire lord within. They died, of course. From 550 to 649 BC, Barovian calendar, Ravenloft expanded and the second domain formed in 547 became known as Forlorn. It's not until the 3rd century that the demi-plane of dread began to truly grow. The motives and true power of the beings who caused this again are a complete mystery. Over the course of these 10 decades, over a dozen new domains appeared. The centuries of trapped isolation had left the residents of Barovia highly xenophobic though. They were suddenly confronted by these new residents with different languages, traditions and beliefs. Like Barovians, they were also reluctant to trust their new neighbours. After all, why were they trapped? Who brought them here? Where were these strange Barovians and were they secretly behind it? This isolationism and distrust has become deeply established in all of the people of the Domains of Dread, a characteristic and tradition they all have in common among their great diversity. The expansion over these years is rapid. Almost every year, new domains and geographic zones appeared out of the mists, and the domains shifted and changed. As these places were not just culturally and topographically different, they seemed almost to be displaced in time as well, with some of the domains being far more advanced than others, though at best they are on par with the Renaissance. So the domains of Dementliu, Lamordia and Gnosis brought with them pocket watches, matchlock rifles, fencing duels and sailing ships equipped with cannons. Also, the lords of the various domains have many strange powers. From 650 to 734 BC, the domains were embroiled in wars, one fierce one being fought in 3 serious attempts at invasion and expansion between Falkovnia and the neighbouring domain of Darkon, or to be more precise, between the newly arrived Lord Vlad Drakov and the Lich Lord Aslan, whose domain is Darkon, and that has the power to spontaneously raise the dead as zombies. Vlad Darkon had his own realm of Falkovia and is fairly prosperous in grain production, but he's a scheming and tyrannical warlord at heart, and he attempted twice more to invade Darkon without success. The borders of the domains are set by the Dark Powers in accordance with their own criteria, and they can't be swayed by the invasion plans of the various Dark Lords. One thing seems clear though, the fate of a domain is tied to the actions of its lord, and those who fail to be sufficiently nasty may see their realm vanish back into the mists to an unknown fate. We'll talk more about that in a moment. The politics of the domains has several big differences. One that Dungeons & Dragons players have to get used to is that Falkovians speak their own language, and the alliance of Barovia, Invidia and Kartakis is one of trade, while the alliance of Dementliu, Mordant, Richmulot and Borka exist mainly because they all share dialects of the same common language. Language plays a big role, as does the wildly different cultures of the domains, which are really not that far apart from each other, but with the heavy air of xenophobia, isolation and this dystopian oppression of the domain's rulership makes the domains a vast patchwork of distinctive populations and environments. For example, in the lands of the Amber Wastes, the domains of Har Akir and Sebua are little more advanced than the Bronze Age, and they still write with hieroglyphics and clay tablets, with papyrus scrolls only just becoming a standard for those who can afford it. So it's wildly different from the Renaissance era of some of the other realms. Geography is pretty fantastic here. The domains of Ravenloft fall into 4 general categories: pockets, islands of terror, clusters, and the core realms. Pockets are simply domains within other domains, while islands are single realms completely surrounded by the mists, almost like an ocean of murk. The clusters usually contain 2 to 4 domains and also float freely in the mists, and the core is a continent of over 20 domains and 2 seas, and is by far the largest landmass in the Ravenloft plain. If you think of it as zones that imprison evil lords and their local population held together by dark powers who seem to be building a larger plane bit by bit, you're pretty much correct. The complexity of the details, though, is going to have to be covered by more than a few videos, as I think just to cover the basics of each domain and the lords who rule over them, the relationships between the domains and the convoluted history of the plane, which has a lot of fantasy hijinks going on, such as a prophecy by the Vistani seer Hyskosa in 735 BC, which over the next 5 years became the era of the Great Conjunction. In a grim and terrible vision, he foresaw a series of 6 signs, portents that would come to pass and shatter the land of the mists. The Lich Lord Aslan was a major cause of chaos in this era, though, causing the signs to come to pass in the wrong order, and absolute mayhem swept through the domains, actually changing the geography of the various realms, along with a lot of the powers of the lords who lived in these domains. This was also the time that a new feature called the Shadow Rift appeared. We'll talk about that later. The 5th edition's inclusion of the demiplane of Ravenloft into the Shadowfell is not that outlandish, but it operates much more like a dark Feywild. It's not just a matter of chunks of displaced land from different worlds being brought together to make a new place. Never forget that the domain lords are intimately tied to the fabric of Ravenloft. The lord of each land is the very heart of the province. The terrain, the natives, the monsters, the effects of magic, and even the enemies are all reflections of the being who presides over it all. When a lord comes into possession of a domain, it will usually seem familiar to them. That is, it will be a mirror of the place they once called home, when really it's a nightmare mockery of it, a cage gilded in their own misery. Buildings will be bent or twisted in the same way the lord who lives there is hunchbacked. A river may have a mud of sticky red clay reflecting the blood in which the local vampire lord feeds. This is a surreal and frightful landscape. It exists in the border between the real and the mythical, a dark twilight zone of gothic horror. Each domain lord will have some secret in their past that torments them. Each domain is a curse, a reflection, a personal torture that goes on and on and on with no escape in sight. But it is the nature of these beings who drew the mists and the attention of the dark powers that they actually designed their own curses long before the dark powers ever captured them. Here, Strahd is forever tormented by his desire for Tatiana. The Mad Doctor is forever haunted by his freakish creation. Each domain is another personal hell for the worst kinds of people, and player characters are left trying to survive in this crazy environment, chasing after hope and any some chance of escape, fighting off madness and eventually falling prey to the spider. I'll be talking more about Ravenloft in future videos. They will be sporadic, they will be somewhat jumbled, but we will eventually learn a lot about this unique setting, its rules, and its fables. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Patreon for some exclusive content and all the full scripts for these videos, buy some merchandise, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.